And there he is. Oh my gosh, Mr. Million subscribers on YouTube. He's Mr. Everything on the Substack, and he's constantly teaching us, talking to us about all the things. I'm always glad when I get to see him here or in New York City, where we just hung out and we had a great time. And it's fun to see you off of cameras and microphones and just let your hair down. You know, I enjoyed that a lot.
As did I, Pete. I made a quick 48-hour trip up to the city, and yeah, we got to sit down and have a couple of drinks and share some laughs. And yeah, I always enjoy when I get to see you. And then you'll be coming down here next for our Team Justice gathering in August. So I'm looking forward to that as well.
That's right. Always a great time. And I got some new material.
Oh, thank God.
Just hanging out with you, I get material to use against you, to roast you at your event.
Yeah, I get it.
A few minutes with the Kirsch, and I get a new bit talking about the history of him or the present. Anyway, there's a lot to talk with you about, and I'm sure you've been talking a lot about all of these things, so I appreciate you. But I hadn't seen you talk about the Epstein stuff yet. Have you posted anything about that?
No, I haven't. I don't believe a word that, tumbles out of Pam Bondi's mouth. Previously, she said, it's all on my desk and I'm pouring through it. And yes, we'll be releasing things very soon. And she's like, what do you mean? No, nothing was ever on my desk. There was no list. There were no clients. I don't believe any of it. And it's, it's not funny because the Department of Justice, the legitimacy of DOJ under Pam Bondi and company is it's horrific. And that was further emphasized by the Abrego Garcia hearing today in federal court in Maryland. I mean, these DOJ lawyers are stone cold clowns. The judge actually said, not to change topics, that, dealing with you is like trying to nail Jell-O to the wall. Pete, in 30 years, I never had a judge say that my arguments were so absurd that it was like nailing Jell-O to the wall. But this is where these DOJ lawyers are right now.
Just outside of the legal world for a second, do you find it? Do you realize how focused on this Epstein files the MAGA world is? Your Laura Loomers, your Alex Jones, and a whole bunch, like all the big MAGA media people seem to be so laser focused on this. And then, people like you, legal experts, and people like me who are talking to experts are thinking about the issues that affect and impact us the most, and probably not paying such close attention. But in MAGA world and Trump world, that seems to be a huge issue and a huge case. And I just wonder if you realize how big of a deal it is, or if it is a big deal, if you think about that Epstein files case at all.
I guess, unfortunately, I have suspected that there were lots and lots of prominent, high-profile folks in those files and on those lists. And I guess I'm just cynical enough to have believed none of it would ever see the light of day. And, the fact that MAGA world is so consumed by this, maybe the most interesting thing that's developed over the last few weeks on the Epstein files front is when Donald Trump's man, at least former man, Elon Musk, made a pretty dramatic assertion that Donald Trump is in the Epstein files. Now, Pete, if that was untrue, I would have suspected Donald Trump would have filed a defamation suit the very next day. But I don't recall him filing a defamation suit against Elon Musk when he made that factual assertion. I wonder why.
Because legally he would have to prove it, and then in that case you would see his actual name. That's the logical conclusion that I think you're leading me to.
There would be discovery, robust discovery, and we would probably learn a whole heck of a lot more about what is actually in those files.
Take me back to the surprising development in the Abrego Garcia case. You posted about this earlier on YouTube already, a couple days ago, I guess. What was this development?
Well, there have been several developments. I mean, first of all, the criminal case in Tennessee feels like it's falling apart. I mean, for gosh sakes, they couldn't even convince the judge they had enough evidence to detain him pending trial. The interesting twist is, defendants, in my experience, usually want to be released from prison rather than remaining in prison. But Abrego Garcia and his lawyers actually asked the judge in Tennessee, no, 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 don't release me. Because if you do, and he had one release in the detention hearing, but if you do, then they're going to confine me pending deportation, and goodness knows where they will send me, maybe right back to El Salvador, where I have a court order prohibiting the government from deporting me to El Salvador. So it's really rare. People usually ask to be released, not detained. Abrego Garcia and his lawyers asked that he continue to be detained in his criminal case in Tennessee. And then, of course, it was up in court again today in Maryland. That's his deportation case, not his criminal case. And the DOJ lawyers were urging the judge, Judge Sines, to just dismiss the case. And basically, here's what they're arguing. I actually have been pouring through this 9-page filing from these third-rate DOJ lawyers. They're saying, hey, judge, no harm, no foul. We eventually brought Abrego Garcia back. And she said, yeah, she being the judge, said, yeah, after you repeatedly said, can't be done, won't be done, not going to do it, the judge said, do you expect me to just forget all of that? That's a quote from Judge Sines. Together with your arguments are like trying to nail Jell-O to the wall. She also said, you are creating chaos in the way you're dealing with this deportation matter. She said, not only am I not going to dismiss this case, because you don't say no harm, no foul when you unlawfully and unconstitutionally deported somebody, and for all I know, you may do it again. That actually is both a foul and it does significant harm, first and foremost to Abrego Garcia, but to the rule of law and to the Constitution. She said, not only am I not going to dismiss the case, DOJ lawyers, I am ordering you to produce a DHS official to testify before me on Thursday about what the heck you plan to do with Abrego Garcia. So, Judge Sines don't play. I like everything I've seen about her from the moment she began presiding over this deportation case in Maryland. And, she's not letting up.
It feels like this Abrego Garcia case we're talking about here, and I think the reason we're talking about it, not only is this decides the fate of this man, but it's a harbinger, or it's a test case for other people who are in similar situations for who DHS wants to deport or claim committed some kind of a crime that they don't have evidence for in this case. Does this case, his case, represent potentially many others?
It's not as if this case would set precedent one way or another. Trial court judges don't set precedent. They saw the legal and factual wood in front of them, and they decide issues in a particular case. But then when that case goes up to the Court of Appeals, it's the Court of Appeals that actually sets precedent. But, let me just read something briefly from page 5 of this ridiculous DOJ brief. They literally say this. They admitted again that it was a mistake that they sent him to El Salvador, even though the judge made it clear that they've been inconsistent on that over time. But here they say, quote, Judge, it was a one-off mistake, and we conceded that it was an administrative error. First of all, when you shit all over somebody's due process rights, the constitutional guarantees of notice and opportunity to be heard, do you really put it in a motion? Judge, this is a one-off mistake, like I missed a foul shot in a basketball game. I found that offensive. And then they said, I swear, Pete, they said, presuming that the government would do something like this again to Abrego Garcia, quote, defies logic. Wait a minute. It defies logic that the Trump administration and his DHS officials might violate somebody else's due process rights, or even Abrego Garcia's due process rights. Again, it defies logic. No, it is the logical conclusion based on everything y'all have been doing.
Yeah, it's the strategy. actually. Uh, talk to me about what happened with the Supreme Court in that final days of decision, and what it means for federal judges and federal courts. You talked about that in a recent video as well. And I mean, it's just like, it's so hard for us to, it's gotta be hard for you to follow all these different cases and understand what each one means and what level they're at and what's next. But what do you think is the current paradigm of federal courts and federal judges given those decisions, if in the final days of the Supreme Court's term last week, or was it?
Yeah, you're right, Pete. It's hard not only to keep up with it because it's like drinking from a fire hose, but it's also hard as a career rule of law guy. I'm not a political guy. I've always been a rule of law guy, to sit there and watch my beloved Department of Justice, which I don't recognize these days, but just completely destroy both the rule of law and the legitimacy of the Department of Justice. I think you and I may have been talking about this over beers a couple of nights ago, but it's like, if I were like a surgeon and I were forced to stand inside an operating room and watch doctors stream in to intentionally kill patients and be able to do nothing about it. That, I mean, I'm doing what I can, as are you, as are your viewers, but that's how I feel. You know, you're killing the rule of law in front of our very eyes, and there really are no checks against your abuse of power at the Department of Justice. So yeah, it's hard. But so, you know, one of the big decisions was obviously the no nationwide injunctions decision, which is offensive. And here's why it's offensive. But at the end of the day, federal court judges are already finding workarounds to get around that. Supreme. Yeah, they found two workarounds, and they're two workarounds that the Supreme Court in the ruling said these other options are still available. But let me start with the no nationwide injunction ruling from the Supreme Court. Think about this. A plaintiff, let's kind of tweak the facts a little bit and use a hypothetical. Let's assume it's a woman who's about to give birth, and she goes into court, she hires a lawyer, and she says, Donald Trump is trying to revoke the constitutional guarantee of birthright citizenship. The child I'm about to deliver will not have a country, will not be a citizen, because that child's constitutional guarantee of citizenship when born on U.S. soil has been sharpied out of the Constitution by Donald Trump. At least he's tried to. And a judge ruled, the very first judge was a Reagan-appointed judge, John Coffenauer, ruled this is blatantly unconstitutional and it can't stand. So not only did this woman have a successful claim for both she and her soon-to-be born child, that should apply to everybody in the United States. If it's unconstitutional as to her, it's unconstitutional as to everybody. But the Supreme Court said, no. We think it would be better if basically everybody had to hire a lawyer and go into court and make the identical argument, even though a judge has ruled it's a blatantly unconstitutional move by Donald Trump. Or maybe they should try to join a class action, or maybe, Pete, that makes no sense. If a federal judge rules that Donald Trump did something blatantly unconstitutional that cannot stand, it feels like it should apply to everybody, not that we all, you know, need to have the court version of a poll tax and hire a lawyer and go in just to protect against Donald Trump's unconstitutional act. But here's the good news. Federal court judges are already finding workarounds. One workaround is, and I just mentioned it, class action lawsuits. And we've already seen a whole bunch of them filed, where you can get a handful of people who have certain claims to make, and everybody with a similar claim can kind of be part of that class action. So these people are representative of the larger class of people who have just given birth, for example, to somebody on U.S. soil. So a class action lawsuit, it's not a perfect fix, but you know, they're being filed. I suspect you're going to see them filed in all 13 federal jurisdictions around the country. And then the other thing is what's called the Administrative Procedure Act. And the Supreme Court said, look, that is still a viable option. That is when, to boil it down to its essence, some government agency or official does something that's unlawful, and the judge can say, no, I am striking it down because it violates the Administrative Procedure Act. And the act by the judge of striking it down has nationwide effect, at least for the time being. It's not exactly a preliminary injunction. And I know it gets a little down in the legal weeds, but and 3 or 4 federal judges have already employed these workarounds that are not sneaky, they're not improper, they're available even according to the Supreme Court in its ruling, no nationwide injunctions for you.
How does somebody, though, know if they're a plaintiff or if they've been somehow accused of some crime? I mean, how do they know that this class action lawsuit exists? Maybe they don't speak English. Maybe they don't have resources. They have no idea. I think they're all alone. I mean, wasn't that the reason why you could just hire a lawyer to represent you and your case would make it its way through? I mean, do these cases, are they pending for days and weeks, and somehow you can, I don't know, use technology, the internet, to connect with other people who are in similar legal situations that you can then join a class action? I mean, I was part of a class action against Taco Bell in 1997, and like 750 of us all got salmonella. But we were all in the ER around the same time with the same symptoms, and some lawyer obviously figured that out. That I'm just explaining the class action lawsuit I was part of, but obviously there's these kinds people know what these are, but not folks who are being, snatched off the street, or in many other cases, even in the hypothetical, a woman who's pregnant giving birth. How does she know about this class action lawsuit? How do they find the plaintiffs the other way around?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I was a criminal prosecutor my whole career. I was never a civil attorney trying to put classes together and have them certified by courts, in order to bring a class action lawsuit. So I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on how the nuts and bolts of it. But just as you were notified by some enterprising attorney who said, wait a minute, we've got a potential class action here, and it sounds like you were notified. I mean, the reach of social media is not only as far as is humanly possible, it's also instantaneous. So, I mean, class action attorneys who are adept at putting classes together and getting them certified for purposes of class action lawsuits, they will get the word out.
Anything else that you want to react to about the Supreme Court term decisions that were made that are going to affect our lives, change our lives dramatically?
I think the overarching theme is they seem to be forever interested in expanding Donald Trump's power, the chief executive's power. And, when you've also given the chief executive immunity from being prosecuted for crimes you commit against the American people, that's a recipe not only for disaster, but for potentially the end of our republic, right? And, I fear that where we're headed now with the militarization of the streets of America, you can almost see Donald Trump continuing to deploy soldiers, not only to California and now Florida, but anywhere he chooses to deploy them. And then, he'll come up with a claim that, boy, things are so bad out there as the midterms approach that I'm going to have to invoke the Insurrection Act, declare martial law, and postpone, with air quotes around the word postpone, the midterm elections, really meaning cancel the midterm elections. And Pete, here is my biggest fear is a Supreme Court might say, listen, we've given all this power to the chief executive, and now he is taking advantage of all of the rulings that have expanded his power. Of course, we know Donald Trump is not going to exercise or wield that power in good faith or in a law-abiding or constitutional way. So, what we are left with, and I keep looking for points of light, and they seem fewer and far between, and they get a little dimmer by the day. But listen, we just got through Independence Day, and we fought for our independence before, and we won. We fought to keep the Union together before, and we won. And now we are engaged in another fight. I'm not saying this one should or will involve violence or firearms or military operations, although Donald Trump will be using the military to full advantage, misusing the military to full advantage. I think we have to fight in every way we can, which is standing up, speaking out, marching, protesting, rallying. And that's just for openers. So listen, we've won tough fights before, and we can win this one. But, the ending is as of yet unwritten.
Just one more question on that militarization of police and just the military itself in the streets. You've just did a part 1 and 2 interview for your YouTube with someone who would know about the military's duty to disobey unlawful orders. You're going to be talking to my friend Mo Davis, who's running for Congress in North Carolina tomorrow. I'm really excited to see that whenever it posts. I love Mo. But what are you, just generally, what did you learn, and what are your concerns? And because we're seeing it today, I don't know if you saw this video. I just saw this very dramatic video of a whole bunch of, I don't know what they were, law enforcement just walking across a basketball court in Los Angeles. There's been a lot of drama in Los Angeles today as we're talking here on Monday. And it's wild to see the way that they're actually moving up on people in military uniforms. Now they've been funded a lot more, apparently, with this new bill. They just got a lot more funding. So it seems like we're going to be increasingly potentially seeing more military in the streets. What did you learn in these interviews? What are your concerns about how the stuff plays out?
Yeah, it looks like we're militarizing ICE, and maybe that's a way Donald Trump thinks he can get around the prohibition, the law that says you can't use the military to engage in civilian law enforcement, the Posse Comitatus Act. So maybe he's found a workaround there. What I learned from an interview, 2-part interview with somebody who's a real expert on the question of lawful orders versus unlawful military orders. His name is Jeff DeWeese. He just retired in March after nearly 30 years as an Army JAG officer. And he is the legal director of something called the Orders Project, which tackles this precise issue. It's part of the National Institute of Military Justice. And listen, military members know, I had it drilled into my head in both officer basic training and when I went to the Army's JAG school before my first active duty assignment. We must obey lawful orders, but we must disobey unlawful orders. And there's actually a qualifier there: patently unlawful orders. And the perfect example of that is the infamous My Lai massacre by Lieutenant Calley.
Right.
He was given an order: kill everyone in the village, men, women, children, infants. That's an unlawful order. And I fear that when Donald Trump in his first term said, as related by his Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, can't we just shoot the protesters in the legs? And Secretary Esper said he interpreted that as both a question and a suggestion. He didn't say it was an order. And obviously they talked Trump out of that. But now there are no guardrails. So I fear we're going to see lots of potentially unlawful orders. And that puts our soldiers in one impossible predicament because they cannot obey patently unlawful orders. So, we're in a dark place.
But you think that they will? I mean, they already potentially have.
I hope they will remember their oath of loyalty to the Constitution, not to a runaway, autocrat in the Oval Office, and they will act in accordance with that oath to the Constitution and disobey patently unlawful orders.
A lot of people out there, though, judges and lawyers, immigration lawyers, especially right now, doing heroic work. Let's end on a high note by just highlighting some of the day-to-day work that voiceless, nameless legal experts working through courts, trying to protect people, trying to harbor actual undocumented folks, much less the judges that are, sadly, you have to say, making brave judgments in the face of this imperial regime, it would seem at times.
Yeah. No, there are, listen, the federal judiciary is holding strong. There are not a lot of Judge Aileen Cannons on the federal bench. Of course, we do have half a dozen right-wing ideologues on the Supreme Court, And because that's the last stop on all of these legal issues, that doesn't bode well for the rule of law or the Constitution. But federal court judges, day in and day out, are ruling the right way, including Republican appointed judges and Trump appointed judges. So let's hope that that continues, and we need to support those points of light, prop them up. And, you know, I do believe, Pete, that there is hope in the likelihood that Donald Trump will be more out of control, be more abusive to the people and our rights. And that will actually strengthen us, not weaken us, because he can't help himself. You know, he seems to get more abusive by the day, and that trend will likely continue, but that will strengthen us.
A few months ago, one of your most popular videos, by the way, on YouTube is why I left MSNBC. So it's no secret, and there's no, you know, hard feelings about it. But just my last question is, how are you feeling about that decision? Most people are desperate to get on cable news to raise their profile. Your profile is about as big as it gets on social media now and YouTube, and you're doing really well on all these things. But I think you told me one of the main reasons was you like to be able to have longer, thoughtful conversations rather than just the sound bites that's cable news, and be able to reach a lot more people than places like MSNBC. But still, most people still would love to be on TV. Instead, you left it. Are you feeling?
Yeah, I left it after 6.5 years. I actually asked to be released from my contract 6 months early. MSNBC was very gracious about it. They put some qualifiers on it, it was fine with me. So let me give you an example of why I'm so content with my decision to go 100% independent, no longer be part of corporate media or legacy media. You know, we had a few weeks ago, we had our local No King's Day rally here in Leesburg, Virginia. I got to address the crowd. It was very energizing for me. I hope it was for them. And as soon as I stopped talking, I jumped on a Substack Live with Don Lemon, Joy Reid, Jim Acosta, and then there were some other guests. And Pete, what I got to do was talk in real time about the ins and outs of being a protester who has law enforcement apply force to them. Because as a prosecutor in DC, one of the things I did, and we all did, is we worked protester cases. When the police would lock up protesters, they would present the case to us. We had to decide whether to charge them or decline to charge them. I would say, don't take this number to the bank because I haven't done an analysis, but probably 90% of the people who were arrested, we did not charge. We didn't have evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt they committed any crime. So I tried to talk to folks who were literally involved in these rallies, these marches, these protests in real time about the do's and don'ts of being out there and having a police officer try to apply force to you. And then if you do get arrested, most people don't get arrested, what you can expect moving forward and how you can maximize your ability to get out of this legally unscathed. And I thought, you know, and I actually went home and turned on cable news, and 3 people were sitting around a table talking about a story from yesterday where I felt like I actually got information directly to the viewers that they needed at that moment in their lives. And that cemented for me the you know, wisdom, if I can call it that, of the decision to just go 100% independent. And I am thoroughly enjoying it.
All right. Well, thank you very much for doing this. I always thoroughly enjoy this. I know you've got to go now hang out with your famous friends probably or something. But Glenn, always a pleasure. American hero. Thank you very much for joining me. And go, if you're not following Glenn on Substack, that's where you're living and doing most of your Substack and YouTube, right?
Yeah, YouTube video every day, Substack. I try to jump on live each night between 8 and 9 o'clock or so and talk about the legal issue of the day.
And that's when we get to see you in like less, you know, more casual and like one of your dumb T-shirts or something.
Yeah, my dumb T-shirts and a lot more cussing. Look, I'm a Jersey guy. It's real hard for me not to cuss. So yeah, it's a little bit looser, All right, I love you, buddy. Thank you very much. I appreciate you joining me. And I love you back, Pete. Great being with you.